Good afternoon, America, the greatest country on earth where hope springs eternal. We are here today. It's March. It's National Social Worker Month, and we have two great guests that we're going to have on the show today. The first one, we always go ladies first. So Admiral Margaret Kibben, retired. She was the Chief of Chaplains for the Marine Corps, and then she was Chief of Chaplains for the Navy, and now she has the unenviable job of being the chaplain of the House of Representatives in the U.S. Congress, where social dysfunction reigns supreme. So good on you. And also with us today, we have Jonathan Singer. He is a professor at Loyola University in Chicago. He is a professor of social work at the School of Social Work, and he is also the past president of the American Association of Suicidology. So welcome, Margaret. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here.
So Margaret, we'll start with you. Why don't you introduce yourself and kind of talk about a little of the work that you've done as a chaplain and what it means to be the Chief of Chaplains of the Marine Corps or the Navy or Congress and the responsibility that comes with that.
Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here. It's a pleasure to be with both of you. And so you've pretty much given my introduction, my background. I did serve in the Navy and Marine Corps for 35 years, serving on the front lines and in the back rooms, all of that, and having a chance to really walk with people who are going through a lot of life issues. Granted that the most of the military service, the average age is between 17 and 22. So a lot of stuff goes on in life in those ages, and there's a lot of things that are needing to be sorted out. So when you think in terms of suicide as an example, that is a ready option for a number of people at that age, because they don't, at that point, you don't necessarily have the perspective of the other options or resources that are available to you. So I spent a good bit of my time in that arena as a military chaplain. To serve in leadership is really to enable other people to do the same thing, having there done, if you will, and empowering the junior chaplains in military service to lean into those real life questions. Chaplains have a different perspective than many, and so with that different perspective, we need to own our space. One of the spaces that we have is the liminal space between being with the member, the individuals, the sailors, soldiers, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, airmen, guardians, and being there, and then helping them to find resources like mental health providers, like those who are social workers, because there's an uncertainty as to what those providers do or what they could do potentially negatively to one's career or one's life. And so chaplains often stand in the breach and create that soft handshake, if you will, or in a soft walkover to another office to encourage individuals to look for the resources and discover the opportunities that are there for them and different answers. My work on the Hill is a little different than that. We don't have 17 to 18 to 22-year-olds, but there are life issues, and it's a slightly different nuance and probably not worth going into at this point.
Hell of a lot of stress, though, that's for sure.
There is stress.
Well, one of the things that's unique about chaplains in the military that not everybody, especially civilians, know is that if a service member comes to a chaplain, there's a confidentiality relationship in the chaplain that doesn't exist in any other clinician. And so if a service member comes to a chaplain and they report something like a sexual assault or domestic violence or any of those things, there's not a duty to report that comes along with that. Whereas if you report to a clinician or to your commander or anything like that, they would have to report anything that might be either a violation of the service code, uniform code of military justice, or a crime, an actual crime. And so one of the things that we've done in our military veterans program is really embrace chaplains. And I got the tremendous honor and opportunity to meet Admiral Kibben when she was the Chief of Chaplains for the Marine Corps, and we've been working together ever since. And it's a really important role that can really help smooth things out. And as we shift to you, Jonathan, with social workers, it's really important for people to understand, and you can kind of go into it, what's the difference between a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a social worker?
Yeah, thanks, John. So there's some really important differences between psychology, psychiatry, and social work, and there's a lot of overlap. So social workers tend to be trained in systems thinking, right? So we think about the individual, the community, the societal level. When we're working with an individual, we always have in the back of our mind that there's policies, there's structures, there's social issues that are impacting that individual level interaction. It's not to say that psychologists don't. Psychologists tend to be more focused on the individual. They have more in-depth training on individual work. Psychiatrists are medical providers, and so they have the sort of the biomedical perspective. They have the ability to prescribe medication. I know there's some psychologists who have prescriptive authority, very limited. But also, since we're talking about sort of structure, social workers are paid the least. And so in lots of systems, they tend to be the ones that are hired first because they are a less expensive alternative for providing mental health services. And so what that means is that you have a psychiatrist who's able to bill, 3, 4, 5 times the amount that a social worker does. So they have shorter visits. They're billing a lot more. They're generating a lot more income for a system. And psychologists also get paid more for the exact same services as social workers. And so it sets up this situation where lots of times people encounter social workers instead of psychologists or psychiatrists because there are more of us in the system. And so that means we get more face time with folks. We get to hear more about what's going on with them. And then in terms of between psychologists and social workers, we're doing very similar work in terms of the mental health stuff.
Yeah, so we're going to get into that. I was one of the first veteran service organizations to be an official suicide prevention partner of the VA. And in that, we had this program where we would get people out of their comfort zone. Currently in the military and the veteran community, there's basically a suicide every hour of every day. And it's been that way for at least the last 17 years that I've been involved. And I, for example, know that in the civilian population, there's a tremendous post-COVID increase in certain demographic groups, whether it's females under 26. I just got a call literally a week ago from the Farm Bureau about rural farmers in Alabama having a tremendous number of suicides in the last year and a half. And so I want to kind of talk through from your perspective, from each of you, in your perspective, what are we doing? What can we do better? Because the suicide numbers are going up. What do you think is a good path forward, or what is it that we're not doing, or what is it that we can do better? Just what's your perspective on the topic? So we'll start with you, Margaret.
That's an excellent question. I think that it's a complex answer, right? There is no one answer to your question, and it's doing things like this. It's having conversations where talking about the natural direction individuals take toward this one particular answer. That's a natural thought. And to not normalize it, but to bring it more into the vernacular, so it isn't this hidden subject that people don't think that they can talk about, that if they do, they'll be stigmatized in some manner or form. But to be able to say feelings are natural, not wrong, they're just natural, and bring that narrative more and more into the conversation, and to do so with to throw as many resources at it as you can. And you've got kind of the front line resources, if you will, right here. But there are other places. As obnoxious as it is when the nurse practitioner asks you at your annual physical, have you thought about harming yourself? As obnoxious as that question is, it's still an important question that, to the extent that it normalizes the interest, the desire to assist, to open up doors that people might have said, maybe in that one moment, you know, I probably do need to talk to somebody. But it's just a surprise. It's finding ways to open up all the doors one can, whether it's at the VA, whether it's at the medical treatment facilities, whether it's articles in veterans magazines or military officers associations about sort of what are people going in these days, to help people realize that they're not alone in the process. Jonathan, I think you probably have a better answer.
No, there's no better. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer for sure on this one.
Look, I mean, I think that addressing suicide risk is it's in part prevention, right? So there are things that we can do to reduce access to lethal means, right? Where we're literally preventing people from acting out suicidal plans. That means securing firearms, reducing access to acetaminophen, those sorts of things. There's also, the sort of the population level stuff that we can do outside of means restriction, which has to do with building lives worth living, making sure that this is a society that people want to live in, right? And you can do that in different settings. So I focus a lot on kids in schools, right? When you have a kid in a school and their identity is discounted, right? And that identity could be anything, right? Depending on where you are and who you're around. If you have even one adult that validates who you are, says you are important, you are making a contribution, you are valued in this world, that makes a huge difference if suicide is an option for that kid, right? There are ways that we can integrate content into curricula where we can make sure that there are kids being trained in anti-bullying programs for creating upstanders instead of bystanders, right? When we're thinking about adults, I think one of the issues that, Margaret was mentioning, sort of that 17 to 22-year-old group, they are still in this phase of older adolescence or emerging adulthood, right? Where their brains are still trying to figure out, who am I? What am I supposed to be doing? There's a lot of affective components to their experiences. They're still trying to access the prefrontal cortex and their decision making. And so being able to provide structure and opportunities for them to feel like they are making a difference in the world, that they're contributing, that they're part of a group, part of a team, is really important, right? Thomas Joyner famously has his interpersonal theory of suicide, where he talks about thwarted belonging and acquired capacity and now I'm forgetting the third one. What's the third leg of his theory? Belonging, burdensomeness. There you go. So when we think about folks in the military, right, what we found is that sense of burdensomeness is really key in suicide risk, in part because the military has a sense of, you're contributing, you're belonging, but there can still be a sense that I am a burden, right? I'm not really a value add to my team. And so all of these things are contributing to this idea that, lend itself to this idea that part of suicide prevention is the actual prevention part, but the other part is making sure that folks know that their life is valued and that they are valuable, and that we want them to be here in this world, and that they should have something that they want to live for.
Yeah, Thomas Joyner is someone who's very, very familiar to our group. We've done a lot of work with him on some suicide research projects using our LifeScore app that I created. You mentioned identity, which I wanted to get in a little bit on mindset. One of the things that we found in working with the app is that mindset matters, and everybody says it, but no one really teaches kids, especially, what mindset is and what's the difference between growth versus fixed mindset. And that really speaks to, in an overview, what you're talking about in terms of what your value is. If your self evaluation of yourself or your self-awareness is that I'm as good as I'm going to be, I'm not going to get any better, that's considered a fixed mindset model. Whereas a growth mindset model is, I'm going to continue to evolve as a human being as I go on the journey of life. And the idea of a journey versus a destination is how I try to explain it to the service members and veterans in our program. So if you want to dive in a little bit more on that, because we have this mindset, it's called the life approach, and there's 9 questions. One of the questions we ask is, which do you value more, your identity or your reputation? And that 17 to 22-year-old, I think the technical term is transition aged youth. And so there's a real when we look at the data that we collect in that, and especially in that group, their mindset is not good overall versus someone else. And I think you can kind of talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I think that, there's this mental model, right? This idea that especially for youth, there can be the sense of what is happening right now is always the way it will be, right? And so if you have somebody that says, this is who I am and I'm never going to be different, right? That can be really challenging when in the moment, who you feel like you are is somebody that's not valued by others, is not making a contribution, is not doesn't really have a life worth living. So I think that piece is really important, especially for youth, because we know that youth can be heavily influenced by experiences. And so sort of shifting the mindset, right, from something that's fixed to something that's growth, about experiences, really tapping into that affective experience, really being able to do something, because we know that the doing affects the feeling, right, which then affects the thinking, is essential. And again, not just for older adolescents or emerging adulthood, but since I was talking about that before, I think that it really fits well, not just with sort of the growth mindset idea, but a lot of the other research that's out there about when people are doing things for others, that sort of sense of altruism adds to a sense of, this gives me purpose in a broader sense. And if I have a purpose, then there's a reason to stick around. And so I think that all of that is really important.
That is a perfect transition to what I wanted to ask Margaret next. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Margaret, you and I always talk a lot about faith and about hope and purpose. And I know that talk a little bit about that and the relationship between faith, belief system, purpose, emotional intelligence, and those kind of things.
Well, faith is what covers what the doing can't do. So to what Jonathan was saying, in terms of, if we get to do something, reorients their brain housing group to such an extent that they can kind of grow into a better understanding of who they are and the meaning for their life. But meaning and purpose are at a different plane, and it's defined differently by different people. And with respect to how it plays to faith, if I think I have meaning, I'm actually putting faith into the idea that I could do something, that something larger than I am. The challenge is that oftentimes when we talk about things like faith, people get a little nervous, because that means to go to church or synagogue or mosque, and that's, yes, that is an element of it, but it's not all of it. And the more secular we become as a society, the harder it is to be able to understand that translation between meaning and faith, and where religion falls into that. Okay, without getting too complicated. The point being is that with faith, with this understanding of meaning and purpose, there is a growth outside oneself. But because we're looking for what that growth looks like, what the goal is we're going to, or how to define what meaning is, what purpose is, faith gives us some language for that. And it gives us, whether you look at it as a divine being, whether you look at it as God, whether you look at it as community, faith gives us eyes outside of ourselves. And that's so critical. I believe, obviously, I'm not obviously, but I am a Christian. So obviously, I believe that God has a role in defining who we are, and helps us to appreciate whose we are. That God created us not as junk, but God created us as valuable, purposeful human beings that are uniquely set here on earth for a purpose, if nothing else, to tend to the earth and to care for its balance for the people and other creatures therein. So where does that leave us with respect to kind of this conversation? Well, what it does is that in taking oneself out of one's current situation that is you're so easily absorbed, you discover that, oh, I'm not the only one out here. And oh, I'm not the only one who's ever felt this way. And oh, by the way, when he was going through it, he realized that there was something more to life. I want that too. I want that more to life thing. And so there is already an innate hunger. There's a desire within each of us to appreciate more. And that's what faith allows us to do, is to appreciate what we can't see when we're sort of caught up in our own psychological myopia.
Yeah, I think that's, I think that faith, a lot of times, how you define faith, when you immediately say faith, people automatically think religion. But I think that faith is more like, it's whatever you believe. It's more of a belief system that you can have as your own, like whatever it is. Like you can have your own sort of moral code, and that sort of emotional intelligence. How am I perceived? How do I perceive others? How do others perceive me? Really, really
I want
can.
to interrupt. I want to interrupt you for just a second, and I want
Go
to say
ahead.
that we can't make our own moral code. That it doesn't come from within us, because we are flawed creatures. We make mistakes. We think this is right because we don't have the full perspective. What faith does, and certainly in terms of religion, but also in terms of community, is it helps us to realize that the moral code is for the common good, not just for me. And where we're failing, I think, as a society, is that we're zeroing in on me, and how does it make me feel, and what do I think is right, and if I think it's right, that means you're wrong. So I would be really careful to kind of humanize this idea of emotional intelligence to the point where it's all about what I feel is right. Do your own thing, it's your
Well,
truth,
no,
all that stuff. It's
yeah. There's
much
no,
larger than that.
no, and I definitely misspoke on that, because I didn't mean to imply that there's your truth. There's just the truth. So what I was trying to say, like emotional intelligence, there's usually the I think there's 4 pillars of emotional intelligence: your perception of yourself, your perception of others, and then how others perceive you, and how that interaction, and how that socializes. And I think self-awareness is the important one. So what is your self-awareness is, I think, an undervalued trait. Um, so Jonathan, when it comes to self-awareness, how do social workers in particular try to help people with self-awareness, even if they do that?
So I would say that, self-awareness is not sort of thought about or talked about in sort of those terms, but one of the core things that social workers do is address how well folks are getting along with each other, oftentimes to move forward with kind of a greater good, right? And so we absolutely address self-awareness when we're talking with folks about, so it sounds like that's not working out so well at work, what do you think your part is in this? How are you stepping into that moment? What sort of things are you bringing to the conversation? How is this playing out in your parenting? What is this like for you when you are sitting in class and the teacher says this, right? When you're talking with your grandkids about your legacy, how are you, so like all of these different kinds of situations, we're definitely bringing up things, ways that we are sort of being ourselves and sort of that, kind of understanding our role in things. But I suspect most of us don't actually label it as such, but it's definitely a core component of interpersonal work.
So we deal with a lot of veterans in our program that have traumatic brain injury, concussions, have had concussions, deal with PTSD. Margaret earlier talked a little bit about stigma. So this is to either one of you. When you're dealing with someone who's not at full capacity in terms of their capability of, and I want to try to say this the right way to not try to diminish these injuries, but what kinds of things can be done when you're dealing with people who maybe have anger issues or have patience issues? You know what I'm getting at, right, Margaret? You've helped me with all these guys. What's some of the ways that we can help, so that you talked about life experience earlier, Jonathan, but it's a lot of times, especially in the veteran community, it's that sudden life experience. So whether it's lose your job or divorce or some type of relationship issue or some type of life-changing event happens, and then how do you process that, and so what can be done with that, if that makes sense?
So I think the resources that Jonathan brings to the table need to be discussed in this answer. But I'd like to first say that it's important to us as fellow human beings to just take people where they are, and not to react. I think especially in the veterans community, there is a lot of anger. It's natural to to work through some pretty traumatic events with anger, with frustration, violence even. And I think we as fellow veterans and as fellow human beings is to acknowledge that those feelings are real. I mean, that it makes sense that they're angry, rather than just saying, "Oh, come on, get over it. That was years ago," or "You're making too much of it," or "Get your act together," or worse, to be combative. And it's more than just "Quit your bellyache," and it's more like, "How dare you say that?" And then things get escalated. But I think as human beings, we just need to be nicer to each other, and that seems like it just seems like a placebo, I'm sure. But what I guess I'm trying to say is that we've become so, as a culture, so trigger happy. If someone is pointing a gun at us or lashing out at us, we're going to look for our weapon. And what I have found in organizations like yours, John, and things that we've done together, is that what makes those moments work is that we're all in this together, and people understand that shit happens. People understand that people are dealing with a lot of stuff, and it's just a matter of patience and, most importantly, love. Again, that sounds a little kind of fluffy, but it really is. Maybe fluff is okay. maybe we need to be a little bit more tender with one another, and a little bit more patient, and hold our thoughts for a bit and let somebody else kind of work through those. But that being said, there are times, especially when you start talking about PTS, that there are mechanical things happening in the brain housing group. There are chemical things happening in the body, and no amount of tenderness or love are going to get you past that quickly anyway. And so to be able to remind people that there are resources out there, and some really effective techniques that weren't there 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Your grandparents' Vietnam is not what you're dealing with today. And so there's some really remarkable people and opportunities, resources that are out there that we need to continue to make sure that we're putting forward for people's use.
No, that's great. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, given what Margaret just talked about, do you want to sort of like tweak your question or sort of move it in a different direction?
Yeah. So like, be kinder, I think is something that's, what do you think about those kind of concepts of just how we act? So for example, you're a civilian. We've talked about this on this podcast with the guys when we interviewed the guy who created the movie Sheepdog. If you're a civilian and you encounter a veteran who has PTSD, your immediate reaction is like recoil or put up defense shield, because you don't know how to interact with that person, or you're afraid that if you interact with that person, there might be some type of anger or violent reaction. So how can we change that interaction? Because I know that a lot of vets tend to isolate because they're afraid that, like to Margaret's point, civilians don't really understand what we're going through, or don't care, or don't, whatever it is. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's an interesting question, and there, I think civilians need training in how to work with vets, right? And understanding that, somebody was, and vets are a heterogeneous group, right? They have different experiences, depending on where they were deployed, when they were deployed, if they were deployed overseas, all sorts of things, right? So thinking about vets as a homogenous group is also a challenge, but understanding that there is a military culture, right? That there's expectations and ways that folks have been trained, and so if you don't have an understanding of military culture, that is a barrier, right, to working with vets. I think that when it comes to addressing trauma and the techniques that folks can use to address trauma, the research that I'm familiar with is that those techniques work whether your trauma was sort of military related or civilian related. And so some of the things that Margaret was talking about, Margaret, you were talking about, love, and maybe that's fluffy, but I think the way that I think about it is that, when somebody's having a trauma reaction, there is a way in which there's a fundamental experience of being unsafe. And love is a fundamental experience of being safe, right? If you feel like somebody is loving you, if you are loved, there is a safety there. There's a comfort there. And so I think that actually speaks directly to a trauma response. And there's some basic techniques that, again, I don't think work differently for folks in the military than folks whose trauma was outside of the military. Slow things down, right? If somebody is in a panic, you have to de-escalate. You have to get them to literally calm things down. You have to be able to breathe, and then be able to identify what the emotion is. Is it fear? Is it anger? Right? Is there fear behind the anger? Is there anger behind the fear? Right? What is going on? Understanding what it is that was the trigger. And this is where I talk with students, social work students, about the importance of distinguishing between a negative emotional reaction and a trigger. There are things that can make us mad, right? Or that we have a negative emotional response to, and that's different than getting triggered. And so, in the context of talking about PTSD, right, we're talking about a trigger that's usually something that there might even be this unconscious, right? You're not aware of what exactly happened, but you know that you're now overwhelmed, and your typical coping is not available. You can't regulate this in the way that you might normally regulate it. And so that would be a trigger response, as opposed to a negative emotional reaction, which is, this guy pissed me off. I know what he said. I know what he did. I know why I'm feeling that way. And really what I need is anger management, right? Rather than addressing a trauma. And so there are different things that you can do. And so, again, like you said, breathe, right? Label what's going on. Understanding what it was that set things off for you, right? So maybe there's a boundary there, maybe there's a visual cue, maybe there's a sound or a smell, whatever it is. And then being able to understand what kind of deep work you need to do. So trauma treatment oftentimes, but doesn't always, oftentimes has something to do with what is the story that's being told about what happened, and how can you then reclaim agency in that story. Sometimes it doesn't have to do with the story, right? So you have treatments like EMDR, right, where it's a lot of somatic processing for what goes on, and there is some talking that happens, but so there's different ways of going about addressing trauma. But first and foremost, I think it's really important, no matter who you're working with as a social worker, you have to have a sense of cultural humility. And if you're working with a vet and you don't really understand military culture, you don't really have a sense of what veterans are experiencing, then that is part of your cultural humility, your acknowledgement that I don't really know and I need to learn more.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit here. One of the things that our program really emphasizes is, and I'll use this as a description, but right now we're in the MAHA, Make America Healthy Again sort of time. And so I don't know what social workers do in this thing, but a lot of the work that we do in our program revolves around diet, nutrition, exercise, and how that helps people, both from a self-esteem, but also a mental health perspective. Margaret, you know, because you've participated in many of our programs and our retreats, but to what extent do social workers get involved in that sort of whole health or holistic health, since they don't prescribe medicine? So just kind of talk through that.
Yeah. So, when we're thinking about holistic health, one of the things that social workers work on is the fact that lots of times our clients are living in areas where there isn't access to affordable, healthy foods, right? Some might use the term food desert. You can have areas where the food is available, but it's out of price, right? Out of your price range. Sometimes you have folks that have affordable, healthy food, but they're working 2 or 3 jobs, and so they don't have the time to prepare it. So a social worker would address some of the structural issues that are present, right? Even while working with an individual or a family. What a social worker wouldn't do is a social worker would never provide any sort of advice or guidance around nutrition. That is outside of the scope of our practice. In the same way that we would not prescribe medication. What we can do is we can say things like, oh, it seems like you've talked about how, this kind of, these foods don't work so well for you. I don't have any expertise in that, but there are nutritionists, or there are doctors, or there are people who have training in this, right? That's something that we can help find some connection for. I think the other piece about this, sort of the Make America Healthy, is that social workers are very sort of diverse as a profession in their own kind of beliefs about things, but we train social workers to start where the client is. And so if a client is saying, hey, so I understand they changed the food pyramid, what's the deal with that? As a social worker, you might think, well, that is a ridiculous thing that they did. It makes no sense whatsoever. And personally, I have no interest in following the new food pyramid. As a social worker, you would say, okay, great. Let's take a look at this. Let's try and understand this. How might this work for you and your family? Right. So it's not about you as a person, it's about you as a professional. And so I think that, I just want to be clear, since it's Social Work Month and we're just talking generically about social workers, that social workers are not coming in with a political agenda when they're working with somebody. They are coming in to start where their clients are. And if our clients are curious about Make America Healthy again, some of the policies around that, some of the recommendations, social workers will absolutely start where the client is with that.
Yeah, I would make the argument that holistic health or whole health shouldn't be political at all. It's just good common sense, eat real food, touch dirt, that sort of thing. I mean, I don't really get into the vaccine stuff because that's completely separate. That's not about that's something else. But in terms of just nutrition, food, exercise, I think those things should not be political, right, Margaret? Since you work on the political,
couldn't agree with you more.
Since you work on the political hill, it's crazy to me some of the things that, like you were talking about, if someone doesn't believe what you believe, let's say, you're one side of the spectrum and you're talking to someone on the other side of the spectrum, and the minute you figure out you disagree, you're mortal enemies. I mean, that to me is wacko. I just cannot understand that mentality whatsoever. And I think that contributes a lot to unhappiness, or why people get so stressed out and think about the world is coming to an end. Like if you don't like the election, there's another one coming up, is the way I always look at it.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
you're onto something when you start talking about the Maha movement. Is that really good stuff is getting lost in political rhetoric, and there's some really good stuff that's coming out of there. Whether it's the food pyramid, whether it's questions about what's the right thing for our health, those are good, solid questions, and we can't throw the baby with the bathwater. By the way, that's my husband's computer singing. I'm not sure what's going on here, but my point is that how do we separate the wheat from the chaff, the noise from the signal, right? There's a lot of noise out there with respect to what's healthy, and healthy being not just nutritionally, but emotionally, spiritually. And because our culture, as you were just saying, is so divided, and it is so reactive right now, that the noise is overcoming the signal that we need to be doing better in all of those fronts. The holistic care we should be pursuing is so important. And why does the political machine have to be the forerunner in that? Why are we not building up organizations like your own, work that Jonathan does, the work that the church or faith traditions do? How do we bolster those resources up all the more?
Well, yeah, even when you talk about religion, there's obviously there's a tremendous rise in anti-Semitism going on because of things that happened, from October 7th on. And that causes a lot of stress. And it's like, as a just a matter of, topics, since it's topical at the moment, you take a country like Iran, and then you have all these folks that would be not accepted by the Muslim religion, associating with them just because they're against Israel. And it's crazy to me that people can't step back and sort of take a deep breath, to use my term about you got to breathe a little, and apply some, maybe it's too simplistic to say, but just apply some common sense. Like, yeah, petroleum-based food additives are bad for us. We shouldn't have them in our food. That should not be political, as an example.
You're right, and what I have found, if you ask what happens on the Hill, what I have found is a simple issue has baggage attached to it. So common sense isn't lost. It's just been overwhelmed by other things. Who are the corporations who are supporting those chemicals? Who are the corporations who are behind that AI? Who are the who's profiting from all of this? And so the goodness gets overwhelmed by profit.
No, and not always, but yeah, I mean, I'm a true believer in capitalism. Capitalism raises people up. Other types of economic systems do not do that. They're inherently prevent that, if you will. As a business major, I have to throw my 2 cents in there, show my educational value. I did take economics 101, so I do understand how it should work. I think that, I don't want to make this a political conversation, because that's not what we do, but there are basic common sense things about how you should, I think, how you can help yourself, your own mental health, your own emotional health, your own physical health, for that matter, by applying a little common sense every once in a while. Step back and take a deep breath. We're coming up on time, but I wanted to just give each of you guys an opportunity to say whatever you want to say with respect to the work that you do. You guys are both stellar pillars of this country and and how people can be healthier, both mentally, physically, emotionally. So, Margaret, you're one of I always say it to everybody, you're one of the best people on earth. And, you and I have known each other probably going on 15 years.
I've been that long.
It's been a minute.
It's quite a while. Yes, it has. Thank you.
I mean, you have an incredibly important job. I'll say that, as the chaplain of the Congress. As you like to say, you like to pray for them, not prey on them. I think that's what the word that you that you said to me. So I'll give you the floor here.
Thank you. And I do. Again, I thank you for this opportunity. I think it shows really the breadth and depth of things that are available in this space. Jonathan is clearly brilliant in his field, and has access to so many resources, and is able to share intelligently and articulately so many wonderful psychological elements to is going on in us, and he does so with poise and with grace, and is reflective of really what that world is about. It's about caring for people and using and leveraging the resources, scientific and otherwise, that are available to him. I think he brings that to the table. I know what I bring to the table is a love for humanity, and it's both end, right? It's under, and not that Jonathan doesn't love humanity, but he's able to articulate that love in a very different way. But there's a resource that we should be leveraging and speaking to and advancing and making available. But likewise, as a person of faith, I know I also bring an articulation, a resource, a value that doesn't have the same fancy words. It doesn't have the same empirical data that many of these other resources have. But faith matters. That's going to be on my epitaph, on my tombstone. Faith matters. And when we realize that we can bring that into the conversation. And as gray as it is, as weird as it can be, but and even amorphous as faith is, when we bring that into the equation, we discover that we really do have this opportunity for post-traumatic growth. We have this opportunity to discover things that we couldn't have seen before because we are limited in our humanity and in our capacity. But the two are better than one, and therefore so many more of us as we come together with our various resources and gifts and graces, all the better we are to care for one another and to look out for one another in this space.
No, I always tell you every time we talk that I believe that the military chaplains and chaplains in general are undervalued and underutilized. That there's so much that we don't take that resource of that group of people. We need. There's so much more that can be done, and we, for whatever reason, it isn't as tapped into as it should be. And I would say the same thing about social workers. In my experience, we had Victor on one of our podcasts earlier, and he was supposed to join us today, but unfortunately had a personal time that he wasn't able to join us. But I'll just throw it over back to you, Jonathan, for summing us up here.
Yeah, thank you. Well, Margaret, those are very kind words that you said. Thank you. That means the world. And I think that your point about the importance of faith and it makes me think about the fact that research, Holly Oxhandler out of Baylor does research on religion and spirituality. She's a social work professor. And one of the things that she pointed out was that, 90% of the people who use social work services have a belief in God, have a faith community that's important to them, and that it's closer to 50 to 60% of social workers who would say they have a faith community or a belief in God. And that one of the ways that social work has not stepped up to the plate always is by ignoring the fact that faith, that spirituality, that religion is important in the lives of those that we serve. And so this is, again, where that idea of starting where the client is, I think, is really important, because you can have some of these ideas about everything from means restriction to anger management tools to how to address trauma, and unless you recognize that all of those things are going to make sense to the person's worldview, and if that worldview includes a faith tradition, spirituality, whatever it is, then you're sort of missing the mark. And so I agree that doing the best for the most number of people requires making sure that is a bridge, that there's a bridge between these ideas, and that they're integrated instead of separated. So it's an honor and a pleasure to be on the program. Thank you, John, and Margaret. It's a pleasure to meet you.
No, it was
Likewise,
great having you. Great having both of you, and it was great to finally get you on the show, Jonathan. We've been trying for a little bit. I think integrated is a key word. We're trying to. We have a new program that we're starting, or have started, called SOAR, SOAR, for strengthening opportunities and resilience. And we use the word integrated holistic health, and it does. Everything does interact, and everything, there is a cause and effect to everything you do. What you eat, how you exercise, how you talk to people, whatever it is that as you function life, the theory of relativity, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So integrated is the key, and I don't think that we're starting to go in that direction a lot stronger. And I think that's one of the great things that is coming out of the quote unquote Maha movement, as it will, is that they are thinking in terms of integration. So thank you guys both for being on. Always a tremendous honor anytime I can spend time with Admiral Kibben, and Jonathan, likewise. We got to get you to hopefully you get out of the the classroom and come and hang out with us. We have to invite Margaret to one of our events and have them come hang out with us for a week, and definitely be an interesting experience for you.
It would be. Thank you.
Well, we're going to invite
And
you.
thank you, John. John, all that you do, all the squirrels you try to herd, and the issues that you're trying to tackle with your great enthusiasm and dedication to it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm on the road at the moment, and I was with some folks that are new to my orbit, if you will, and my phone goes off like, almost, every 5 or 10 minutes. And one of the calls I got was from Paco's wife, and so I gotta deal with some stuff. But anyway, my life is kind of interesting. Sometimes it's not so much fun, but it is important, and I take it very seriously, and I do try to tackle it with as much enthusiasm as possible, because why not? It's you do have choices in life. You could do things in a positive manner or in a negative manner, and you as an individual kind of control that, how you react. And so anyway, just try to do the best you can.
Very good.
It's wonderful.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Until next week.
Blessings.